meeting, so I spent a couple of hours with him talking to him. So I had a fairly unique position in the sense that I did try to create a bridge between him and the Muslim community. But by the 1990s, there was so much politics involved. You had Khomeini had announced the fatwa and he had died, and the Iranians came in, and Iranian politics was now making an impact in the West, and the Saudis were making an impact. So it became very, very complicated. Emotions were extremely high. And among the Muslims, it was a red line in the sand. Every Muslim had to say, Rushdie must be killed. So my just saying, not only am I not saying he must be killed, but I'm prepared to talk to him, meant I had crossed that line. So it was a very uncomfortable feeling. And one of my BBC appearances, this is Start the Week. It's a very distinguished program on the BBC. And they have a surprise guest every week. And that week it was Salman Rushdie. He just walked into the studio and joined the conversation. And when I went back to Cambridge, I got irate calls from Muslims who said, brother, you were in a studio with Salman Rushdie and you didn't kill him. And I said, look, brother, it's very difficult in a studio. And, you know, I tried to be facetious. I said, there's these mics and the mics are very high. And what brother, you should have jumped over the mics and killed him. I said, how can you jump over the mics on the BBC in a studio and try to get Salman Rushdie? So feelings were that emotional and irrational. And really, Bill, when we deal with religion, we all of us, Muslims and non-Muslims, have to understand that while you may think Muslims are irrational in how they respond to the symbols they hold dear, Muslims would look at you and say exactly that in reverse. They would say, what symbols do you hold dear? Americans, you tell me. Stars and stripes? The Constitution? Don't we get very upset? As an American, I get upset when I see someone burning the stars and stripes, because that is a symbol. It's not religion so much. So, you know, poor Jesus gets a he gets short shrift here, but the symbols of the United States. Similarly, for Muslims, the symbols are the Prophet and the Holy Book, because the Quran is believed to be divine by Muslims. So desecrating it, or the Bible or the Jewish text, because Muslims believe that they are part of the same Judeo-Christian Abrahamic legacy, Muslims get upset by that. And some of them may rationalize it and say, well, they don't understand, or try to explain it. Some of them may get very angry, and some of them, particularly in my part of the world, get violent, because they are largely illiterate people. They're illiterate, and they're living in societies that are 60, 70% illiterate. These are the official figures. And their only answer is passion and anger and destruction. And that's what they do. They come out in the streets and they attack embassies, they attack schools, they attack buses going by.
Let's shift topics for a few short questions, and then we'll get to your Q&A tonight. But let's talk a little bit about U.S. foreign policy. Give us your assessment of the U.S. action in Afghanistan over the last decade.
Bill, my assessment is not very far from that of many Americans, very thoughtful Americans, very patriotic Americans, who are saying that this strategy, the objectives, and the way we conducted them could have been conducted in a different way and perhaps achieved far greater success. Because I ask myself, and I want the audience to think about this, as Americans, a decade into a war, this is the longest war the United States has fought in its history. We fought the Germans, a world power, a genuine world power, a power that dominated Europe, and fought that power to the end, finished it. Fought the Soviet Union to the end. There was no Soviet Union at the end of the 1980s. It's been a decade, and the Taliban are not gone. And every commentator writing from Afghanistan predicts, and Afghans are predicting, that the day the Americans leave, the Taliban will be back. So my question is that if we are investing, as we have done, trillions of dollars, thousands and thousands of lives, American lives, also Afghan lives, in Iraq, Iraqi lives, Pakistani lives, what have we achieved in the end? What have we really got in return? You know, as an investment. War is a kind of investment in a different non-financial manner. So what have we got in return? My answer would be very little. If you confront the reality where President Karzai 3 or 4 days ago makes a statement. This is the man that was created by the United States, propped up by the United States, and given billions of dollars by the United States. Makes a statement that if the United States and Pakistan were to go to war, he would support Pakistan against the United States. So you ask yourself, what have we really got in return? And I would say, Bill, that this war could have been conducted very differently, with very different results, had, and here's my punchline, had America been true to itself, had America been more American. And that is the vision of the Founding Fathers. I may be simplifying, but when you're not true to yourself, this is what ends.
Okay. Give us your thoughts on the meaning of Arab Spring.
Arab Spring is a genuine upheaval, an earthquake taking place. And I, as someone from that part of the world, was absolutely thrilled. As a scholar of history, I want you to contemplate what I was looking at, studying revolutions. You remember the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, the Iranian Revolution. Hundreds of thousands of people killed, millions displaced, complete turmoil, and a cycle of violence from which these societies took decades to come out. And what impressed me so much with this Arab Spring was the dignity of the ordinary Arab. The young Arab in his jeans or t-shirt, or the young Arab woman, men and women right up there in front, young, cheerful. At the height of the Cairo revolt against Mubarak, and I used to watch the news very carefully because I was studying it, and I didn't see any of this mass hysteria where you say down with the rich or down with the capitalists or massacre the Christians or massacre the minorities. There was always that sense of hope and almost good humor. That has impressed me, but at the same time, revolutions are very unpredictable creatures. We don't know how they're going to end up. I don't think this is the end of the story. We are in the middle of this phase of what is being called the Arab Spring. We have to wait several years for it to play itself out. We are still seeing how dictators are digging their heels in and using absolute brute, insane, psychopathic force, like in Syria, like in Yemen, to hold on to power. And it's almost Shakespearean in its tragedy, in its dimensions, how these individuals believe that somehow they're doing some good to themselves to hold on to power. It's almost Shakespearean because there's no other explanation. So I would say this is a moment in history where, again, America has to be much more active in the Middle East and make up for a lot of lost time, and to actually be able to say, we believe in democracy, human rights, civil liberties. That is what we stand for. And if you're taking this path, we are with you on this path. And that is not something that average Arabs believe in. They believe that the United States has consistently backed the local dictator against their interest, that is the Arab street. So it's a moment for all of us to be reflecting on this massive change. The sacrifices and the courage shown by the average Arab, just think of what they have done. The challenging of Mubarak to an Egyptian is literally like taking on the Sphinx or the pyramids. It is unthinkable. The authority and power and the influence of the Secret Service in Egypt was so influential and widespread. And yet, ordinary Egyptians, or Tunisia, where it began, this ordinary man burning himself, lit the match, the catalyst that just went like a wildfire through the Arab world. Remarkable, remarkable. And they deserve our applause and our admiration.
I have one other question tonight, then we're going to open it up to your Q&A. And so if I can get my students out who will be manning the cordless mics, that would be terrific. Dr. Ahmed, some people believe that women are not treated equally or fairly in Islam. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair question. I'm asked that question a lot, and I agree that in many senses, Muslim women have a long, long way to go. The Muslim women I meet have been deprived of their heritage. They're deprived of their properties. They are pushed into their homes, not allowed to speak. That bill, and this is my second part of my answer, is Islamic custom and tradition, and it has nothing to do with Islam. And here's my answer about Islam, and there are Muslim women in the audience. Islam, and I've done a comparative study, is probably the most advanced and liberal religion of all the world's religions when it comes to women. In the 7th century, this is a millennium before anything like this happened in the West, a millennium, women were given the right to inherit property, to lead businesses, business enterprises, to be poets, to be writers, to be scholars. And the Quran, the word of God for Muslims, repeatedly addresses men and women, right up there, one and the other, one and the other. And when the Prophet of Islam, and for Muslims, he is the person who constantly gives instruction, as it were, a prototype for Muslim behavior. When he was asked exactly the same question by a Muslim who went to him and said, "O Prophet, show me a shortcut to paradise." Muslims, even then, as you can see, were thinking of shortcuts and got them in trouble then and now. So this man comes up to the Prophet and says, "Show me," and he of course says, "No, you must pray and do this." And he said, "No, it's really shortcut." So the Prophet says, paradise is at the feet of the mother. Now every woman in this audience should understand what that means. It means it is the mother who sacrifices and who cares and nurtures the family. And if you look after your mother and respect and love your mother, that family will be a strong family and you will be a compassionate human being. So your mother and how you care for her and love her is the gateway to paradise. Next day, the Muslim went home, thought about it, came back the next day and again asked the same question. He said, "Oh Prophet, I've been thinking about it, but is there another shortcut?" Maybe he didn't have good relations with his mother. He must have whacked him around when he was young. So the Prophet says, it lies under the feet of the mother. The man went back and came back the third day. And the third day, the Prophet gave the same answer. Now, this is a very famous saying of the Prophet in the Muslim world. And to me as a Muslim, I understand its significance. So I know the importance, you're talking about the Muslim world and treatment of women, the importance and authority of women in my family, very traditional women. I know the importance of my mother, of my wife, and my daughters. And I know that they're not second in any way or consideration to anyone in the family. Muslim world itself, Bill, remember we've had, with all the problems, and I agree there are lots of problems for women today because of the illiteracy and the customary tribalism and so on. We've had prime ministers. Benazir Bhutto was the first female prime minister of Pakistan, prime ministers in Bangladesh, presidents in Indonesia. There have been ambassadors, governors, writers. And Muslim women are perhaps the most impressive part of Muslim society. They are right up there in front. They are aware that they have to carry the flame, as it were. They have to face the brunt of all the attacks on Islam and the interpretation of Islam. And I don't see them either discouraged or disheartened. I find them much more confident, much more hopeful than the men, who at times are uncertain and confused because they have different ways of responding to crises. And I'm not despondent at all. In terms of what you hear about Islam, you'll hear honor killings. Honor killings happen in Muslim societies. Honor killings happen in Christian societies in Africa and Asia. That has nothing to do with Islam. Let me emphasize it. Nothing to do with Islam. Female circumcision, again, we hear of it associated with certain East African tribes. It has nothing to do with Islam. Again, these are tribal customs that have been adopted by Muslim tribes and in time have become custom, and in time people see it as Islamic custom. So again, Bill, knowledge, understanding, scholarship helps us remove some of these questions which are circulating and keep coming up.
Okay. Let's go to your Q&A. Please remember, if you have a question, raise your hand, wait for a student with a cordless microphone. Secondly, please ask only one question. I want to get as many questions answered tonight as we can. Third, no speeches. We want to hear questions. We want to hear Dr. Ahmed. Okay, let's get our first question. We have some up front. We have one right up front here, Jen, and Quinn, you go first.
And do introduce yourself, please. I'd love to know who you are.
Well, I am a liberated woman. I would like to know, is there ever a chance there will be a true democracy and freedom of expression as long as religion and politics are tied together? We have separation of church and state. Will that ever happen in the Muslim nations?
I hope so. If you take some examples, take Malaysia, very much a Muslim country, very proud to be a Muslim country and a thriving democracy. Indonesia, again, by and large, not the most satisfactory, but a democracy, regular elections, people are voted in and voted out of power. This may be a particular problem for the United States in terms of only democracy if you're a secular society. I don't see this as accurate for other societies. India is another example. People tend to be very religious, whether they're Hindus or Muslims or Sikhs, and yet it's a democracy. And again, probably the world's biggest democracy. So I think with law and order, with fair elections, with accountability for its politicians, I see no reason why people can be of faith and have a thriving democracy. And when you say there's no religion here, I'm not so sure that the world would agree with that. When the President of the United States is asked, which is your favorite book, and he says the Bible, and I'm inspired by the Bible, I don't think a lot of people would see that as very secular. So a lot of people would see religion as perhaps not so intrusive, but certainly as an important element in the American character of its political leaders.
This gentleman right here on the inside, I think he got his hand up first.
My name is Dan Dannenberg. I'm a resident of Lawrence. Do American Muslims expect Sharia law to be integrated with American law and jurisprudence?
Dan, that's a very good question. I'm asked that a lot. In fact, I was on television several times talking about this. Several things. The short answer is no. Short answer is no, simply because the Muslim community is tiny. It's about 7 million, which means roughly 2% of the United States population. So Dan, do your mathematics. My mathematics is shaky, yours is probably better. But try to apply 2% to 98% in a democracy, not a dictatorship. And then tell me how this 2%, even if every Muslim wanted the Sharia, could be imposed on the United States, number one. Number two, as I pointed out, the Muslim community is so diverse. It represents the entire Muslim world. So there are Cambodians and Afghans and Turks and Pakistanis. The whole Muslim world is here. How do you imagine this community is going to unite on saying we want the Sharia, when in their own countries there is no Sharia? Think of it, Dan. The Pakistanis, for example, my friend Dr. Hedri is from Pakistan, ask him, 98% of Pakistanis are Muslims, 98%, and they think they're the champions of Islam. They don't have Sharia. So if 98% of a population is not imposing Sharia for itself, which Muslim would be crazy enough to say, we are going to impose it on 98% who are not Muslim? It makes no sense to me. Yet, Dan, I hear this question all the time, and it goes back to my earlier point. It has somehow become blurred and mixed up and confused and collated with the American understanding of Islam. So Americans are constantly saying, are the Muslims taking over, the Sharia being imposed, is the Constitution being removed? The Muslims will be the first people to defend the Constitution. They're here because of the US Constitution. They're here to come and seek religious pluralism and freedom because of the societies they left behind. Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, Egypt, these are all Muslim societies, Dan. And these are all 90%, 98% Muslim. No Sharia, no Sharia, no Sharia. So the idea that 2% somehow want the Sharia, to me it makes no sense. I haven't met a single African American who's saying we'll impose the Sharia. I haven't met any Middle Easterns or South Asian people wanting the Sharia. So I would safely put that aside, and when you ask this question, give my answer to them.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Haverty. I'm a senior here at KU. In terms of people's reactions to the deaths of Muammar Gaddafi and Osama bin Laden, can it be moral to react to someone's death with happiness and rejoice in it?
Well, again, that's a very good question, and I was on one of these NPR shows with the bishop and the senior rabbi of Washington, who are great friends of mine, and we were reacting to OBL's death, Osama bin Laden's death, asking the same question and debating this. Should we be rejoicing or saying he's a bad man, evil man, did terrible things, he's gone, and we pray for every soul and so on. And that's a debate that each one of us has to have. I think it's in very poor taste simply because it sets a precedent for future rulers. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future to the current rulers of these different countries. I believe still that the best method is the legalistic method. That is the best method. If you can get hold of a man like Gaddafi, send him to The Hague, let him be tried, and let him face the humiliation of his own misdeeds daily for years and years. And I think there's no greater punishment. On the other hand, you can imagine the chaos and the turbulence that is Libya today, and in the midst of this, they get hold of a man who they believe has tortured them and raped them and killed them for 4 decades. And the anger is so irrational and insane that they did what they did, which is literally kill him to death. I think this is what happened in the end. Someone shot him and someone beat him up, and he died that terrible death. So I would say, Mitchell, that that's a question that you have to answer as a Christian or an atheist or an agnostic or a Muslim for yourself. But I would say I would always tilt towards humanism, because if nothing else, our joint Abrahamic vision of the world, and as filtered through the lens of the founding fathers, constantly emphasizes humanity and civility and knowledge and understanding.
Let me ask a follow-up to that, Dr. Ahmed, and it's a difficult question. Do you believe the president made a mistake in ordering bin Laden's death?
Well, Bill, the president, I don't think personally made that decision, because it was a follow-up to decisions made much earlier in the previous administration. As you know, President Bush had promised to smoke him out and get him to trace him to wherever he was, whichever cave or hole he was, to quote President Bush. So in that sense, this was the end of a story that began many years ago, and it was inevitable. I thought there was the big discussion on what to do with him once you kill a man of that mythical stature on the world stage. He was the ultimate symbol of what happened on 9/11 and subsequent events. And I thought here the president was very discreet. He showed cultural sensitivity by simply disappearing him rather than burying him on land. Had he buried him on land somewhere, like the people in Libya not burying Gaddafi in plain sight, there's no doubt that Osama bin Laden's grave would have become a shrine, and in time would have gathered momentum, and in time would have become, again, a center of a movement of what he represented, which is mass violence, mass rebellion, mass upheaval. And so in that sense, the president showed sensitivity. Killing him, I think, was inevitable, because if they had got him, there's no question that was one of the objectives of the American mission. Remember, the objective of Afghanistan was twofold: OBL and the Taliban. OBL's dead, but the Taliban are still there, and they're not going to go away. That's their land. They're going to be there. And they'll be there forever.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Ahmed. My name is, I should stand up, I guess. My name is Saima, and my question is, 10 years after 9/11, has relations between Muslims and non-Muslims improved?
Improved, you mean, Saima, in the United States or abroad? In the United States? You know, I've been, from 9/11 onwards, I was in class that day, and when that plane slammed into the Pentagon, and since that day to now, I've been on the road non-stop in trying to explain Islam to Americans and vice versa and build bridges. And after 10 years, and the bishop and the senior rabbi in Washington, who were great friends, we were talking about this. They're also very involved. And we felt that we are on the escalator running in the opposite direction. We are on the same spot. So while we have been non-stop and we felt we've achieved so much, in fact, the gap, and your polls, the Pew poll will confirm this, the gap between Americans and Muslims is as wide as ever. So that gap has not really closed. And what do? We have two choices. We can opt out and say, let the gap grow wider and let there be more chaos, let there be more possible violence, more fragmentation, more unhappiness, more pain, or continue to do what we are doing, is dialogue, discussion, bringing some hope of bridge building in the hope of closing that gap. But the gap remains. There are many, many hopeful signs, many positive initiatives, many dialogues like this, but also huge challenges, huge challenges. I mean, Dan's question, for example, why aren't the Muslims out there explaining this? Dan shouldn't be asking this question. Muslims should have explained this to him 10 years ago. It's still there, still out there. Questions of Muslim women. You're a Muslim woman, Saima. You have to be out there explaining Muslim women. Bill's question about Muslim women. So there's a lot of work still to be done. And that's in the United States. Now think of the work to be done in the Muslim world in terms of American foreign policy and the American presence and the need for America to have a presence on the international stage, which it must. It must be there and it can't back out. It can't simply pack up and come home.
Let me just add that the reason I asked the question about Muslim women was I was asked to do that by a Muslim American woman
Aisha,
who wanted me to illustrate that point. So there was a reason behind that question. Next question.
And which one is Jen's question?
Hi, my name is Uzair Bajwa, right at the back. Okay, my question is the message about the U.S. foreign policy. What message the U.S. sending to the Muslim world? Okay, when I see under the Iraq war, 100,000 women raped. In Afghanistan, there have been reports of whole battalions killing people for fun and collecting their body parts as souvenirs, and that has been going higher up the ranks till colonels. In Pakistan, drone strikes, Human Rights Commission reported, have killed more than 1,000 innocent children, women, and men without any regard to any judicial or whatever due process. So I mean, the message, a child growing up in a Muslim world, how would it see America? I mean, people all talk about peace and America doing this, but a child growing up in that part of the world, when he sees that, United States being as an occupier rather than being a problem solver, I mean, so what sort of foreign policy is this, and how does it make the world a better place?
So what is your question? I'm not sure.
My question is, what's America's foreign policy? I mean, which direction is it going towards the Muslim world? I mean,
I don't think most Americans have any idea what their foreign policy is. If someone can illuminate the foreign policy of America today and what it's doing in terms of its stated purpose, the President of the United States, the present and the past, constantly talked about winning hearts and minds. But as Mr. Bajwa has just pointed out, if this is how we are winning hearts and minds, then we are rapidly losing more hearts and minds than winning them. So where's the foreign policy to implement that vision? I'm very unclear about that. Maybe someone from the audience can comment on this. Can someone explain American foreign policy? Anyone want to take a shot? Bill?
I don't care for the policies of the past two presidents in many respects, so no, I won't try to do that.
But let me talk about American foreign policy, Mr. Bajwa, and I want you to listen. You're from Pakistan, I suspect. Do you recall the time, you were too young, but do you recall the time from your reading of history